We are going to talk about checklist now. Checklist is a very important piece of document, which is called an audit document, which is very extensively used by the certification body and the auditor, even in internal audit scenario. Audit checklist is a very important and handy tool for the auditors. It has a lot of advantages. Well, there are certain drawbacks as well. In next few minutes, we are going to talk about the advantages and the drawbacks of checklist, how to prepare a checklist, and how you can use a checklist to your advantage. Let's dive in. Chapter 7, Audit Checklist. By the end of this chapter, you are going to learn and develop skill for framing questions. You will develop skill to prepare a checklist. Develop skill for framing questions to audit the various requirements of the standard comprehensively. You will develop understanding how to relate various processes and identify and document objective evidence in the checklist. Audit checklist is an aid memoir. It helps you to remember. It reminds you. The audit checklist shall be used as your servant, not your master. You should not look at a checklist and ask question ever. So use the checklist quite judiciously. The checklist helps auditor to organize, plan, conduct, and report audit activities in a consistent manner. This word consistency is very important. If the same checklist or similar checklist is used by different auditors, the output of the audit process and documenting the observation is going to be quite consistent and similar. So this brings about consistency of the audit reporting process. It is not mandatory, but highly recommended for a systematic approach. Use of audit checklists bring disciplines in auditing and the reporting. The purpose of this is to assist memory. Nothing is missed inadvertently. If the checklist items are there, it will just give you a reminder that this point is missed. The checklist helps you to ensure that nothing is missed inadvertently. It ensures comprehensive coverage of all applicable elements. Because checklist covers everything, once you cover all the elements, you have comprehensively covered all the requirements of the standard or scope of the audit for which you are going to conduct audit. It ensures repeatability and consistency. We have used the word consistency before. It brings consistency, similar approach, similar results by different auditors. It brings repeatability. The same results can be produced again and again. So once you are using a checklist, all the audit recording and the process becomes repeatable. You will manage the time effectively. It will help you to organize taking notes because you have got the audit checklist where spaces are designated. You will keep your notes in the designated places. This helps organizing, taking the notes during the audit and subsequent review by the certification body auditors. Imagine you produce a report and send it to the certification body. The reviewer will look at the audit report. Now they have to find the information in right place quite quickly. If you are keeping all the reports and the notes in the designated place where the report and the notes has to come, it becomes very easy for the auditor, a reviewer to look at where to look for, and he will get the or she will get the information in the right place. If you're using 20-page checklist and you take notes documented in different places, for each of these, just imagine how difficult it would be for the assessor. He or she has to flip through all the pages to find one piece of information within the 15th page or 20th page or the first page, but still they have to flip through all the pages. So the review process will become quite cumbersome and difficult and time-taking. You can't manage the audit review process effectively if you are not systematically documenting the observations. So there are a lot of advantages. And this can form part of the audit report. Normally, in the certification body that we work, the audit report includes the audit checklist. Let's see how we can prepare a checklist. This is a suggested format. You may have different formats. In one place, we have got the requirement of the standard here. For example, 9001, 2015 clause numbers are here. You will develop question or the bullet point that you are going to check. So these are your checkpoints. And these spaces are reserved for documenting your observation during the audit. Now let's look at how you can prepare the checklist based on the requirement of the standard. Say clause number 5.3 of ISO 9000:2015 requires organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. The top management shall ensure the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned, communicated, and understood within the organization. That's the requirement. So your question here is, are the duties and responsibilities of personnel clearly defined? Of course, relevant person is quite obvious. And is it understood? It's communicated. What is the process of communication of their roles and responsibility? Those kind of questions are going to be here. So you can write communication process, how they communicate their roles and responsibility, how it is made sure that the roles and responsibilities are understood by the responsible person or the performers. Things like that, those kind of questions can come here. Let me give another example. 9.2.1 requires the organization shall conduct internal audited plan intervals to provide information on whether the quality management system complies with the ISO 9000 requirement or with the organization's own requirement. That's the subsequent requirement. So your question is going to be, are internal audits conducted at planned interval? How intervals are defined? How intervals are decided? And is there evidence that internal audits are being performed at the defined interval? And if the response from the question is satisfactory, you write okay. If there is any non-conformity, if there is something not meeting the requirement, you note down here is a non-conformity, and you can write the notes and take the non-conformity here. So as you progress during the audit, you are comprehensively covering all those points and the notes are coming. It is quite possible that you are moving you are moving and progressing in a logical manner, in a logical sequence. You are asking questions, there are responses coming from the auditee, and you ask another question, and in this process, you move slightly away from the next question. And it is possible that one of or few of the areas have not been verified. And at a certain point, and at a later point, you found that these points have been missed. You can come back and take note in those areas. I can ask, yeah, I missed those points. Can I ask you what you do? And those response can be documented in the designated place. So the drawbacks of the limitation of a checklist leads auditor to a predetermined sequence of thoughts. If you are following the checklist blindly, there is a certain question written down in a sequence. So if you follow that track, you are limited, you are defined, you are moving in a predetermined path, as if you are moving in a railway track. So this limits your freedom to audit if you're following the rigid sequence of the question based on the checklist. May limit questions that generate yes, no type of answers. So if you're following, do you do this? Do you do that? So it can lead to a monosyllable answers. That can be a limitation. May lead to a boring and rigid auditing process. It's quite obvious. Auditing is an art. Auditing has a lot of science behind it because sampling has got a lot of statistical approach. But the way you ask questions is a high level of conversation. You ask questions, you try to probe into whether the organization system is in place, is established. Are they following the system effectively? And is it producing results? This is what your intention is. So you will ask questions in a logical sequence. And that's what is artistic. That makes auditing is a very high level of artistic conversation. So if you're following a checklist and ask question looking at this gives an impression that your business is to, put checklist and fill up certain response to some of the questions that you are required to fill. And once all the checklist has been filled, your audit is done, which is leading to a very monotonous and boring exercise, and that neither auditor enjoys, neither as an auditor you enjoy. So how to overcome the limitation? One of the most important areas, what is the most effective way to overcome these limitations are prepare, plan, and be familiarized with the organization, its processes, and the documentation thoroughly before you go for the audit. So you know what exactly you are going to check, what exactly you are going to verify. All right. Prepare well. Use the checklist as your aid memoir, as I said. You are asking questions based on the logical sequence, and then write down your response in the designated place and look at the checklist to help your memory, to remind you if something has been missed. You can add specific checkpoints and audit points to the standard checklist based on the stage 1 audit. For example, if I wait for a stage 2 audit or during the preparation stage, you have got certain areas to focus. You can identify, okay, I will check whether the last non-conformities have been effectively closed out or not. What kind of corrective actions they're taking. There are so many non-conformities in certain areas. Have they stabilized those areas? So those kind of things you can note down in your checklist to make it specific for a specific audit. Use verification points rather than questions. You can ask, you will check the periodicity of the audit, the frequency of the audit. You don't have to write how frequently you do internal audit. That kind of question is not required to be, written in the checklist. If you say the competence to be verified, that's good enough. You don't have to write how do you define competence of your people, how do you ensure people are competent based on the defined criteria and so on. So your verification point is important, not the questions. And you will be tempted to ask the question if you write questions there. Rather, you should use bullet points that reminds you, okay, I have to check the competence, I have to check the records and so on. Audit as per process approach, move in natural flow of audit, take notes in the checklist designated spaces. Very important point, I have already told you. For example, you ask, can you explain your audit process? So how do you define the audit frequency? How do you define the interval of your audit? How do you identify the auditor's part? How do you assign an auditor for a specific task? Things like that. Okay, next question would be, can I have a look at their competence? Can I see their training record? So from 9.2.2 and 2.1, you are moving back to competence, which is 7.2. So this is how you really move along with the flow of the process logically. Take notes in the designated place. That would make your audit a fascinating, enjoyable exercise, both for you and for the auditee as well. And they will really appreciate that here was an auditor who was competent and he was so good in asking questions and he covered everything in a very logical manner. We learned a lot in the process, a lot of deficiencies in the system were systematically identified, and it was a fantastic audit. That's how you should add value to the audit. One thing you must remember, never look at the checklist and read a question from a checklist. Never, ever. Now, you are going to prepare a checklist. While preparing the checklist, you should use 5W and 1H. These 5 Ws are the friend of the auditor. What, where, why, when, who, and how. So these are the kind of words you are going to use. Can you explain how audits are planned, who approves, how long you keep the record, who keeps the record, who approves the auditor, or who approves the audit plan, why you do this audit in that frequency, things like that. So this kind of words you can use for asking your question in a very friendly manner. Now, you will develop a checklist, and this checklist you are going to use in your subsequent simulated audit. You are going to be assigned certain area to audit during the case study and during your on-site audit, that you are going to do a simulated audit and demonstrate your ability to ask questions, look at the objective evidence, and make a decision on the conformity assessment process. So what you do is, this checklist is what you are going to use during your on-site audit. You will take notes in the audit checklist. In the next exercise, you are going to prepare a checklist of one of the elements which will be given to you. For developing the checklist, the same element you are going to audit. For example, product and service realization process, clause number 8.5. This is one element of the standard given to you. So you will prepare a checklist for that. And when you go for auditing, a simulated audit, you will audit clause number 8.5, and you will ask questions based on the checklist that you have developed, take notes based on the response you are getting from the auditee in the simulated audit process, make decisions whether the situation is in conformity or not, and make your judgment, prepare the audit report. If there's a non-conformity, you will do a non-conformity report. If it is in conformity, you take those notes in your checklist and your audit report. That's how you will move. So as I've said, checklist is a very handy tool for an auditor. It is extensively used by the auditors and certification bodies throughout the world. This has to be used judiciously to help your memory as an aid memoir. Don't look at the checklist and ask questions. You can audit in the logical sequence of a process. You move along with the audit trail, either forward trail or reverse trail that we have already discussed, and take notes in the designated space in the checklist. You can ask questions as you have given. While auditing, you are auditing clause number 9.2.2. You ask questions there. When you are asking competence, put the note or the observation or the evidence on the competence in clause number 7.2, which is reserved for the competence. So this is how you use the checklist judiciously. And at the end, you look at the checklist whether all the elements have been audited comprehensively. If you find some space not filled, you will immediately know this part was scope of the audit and has not been audited. So there is a huge advantage, and some drawbacks is that it can lead you to a predetermined path, and you are possibly limited. You move like in a railway track, but liberate yourself from those rigidities, move freely along the process, move along with the process, take notes in the designated place, and do an audit in a very spirited manner. Use the checklist as your aid memoir. And you are the master. Use the checklist as your servant. I hope the checklist was very clear, and you can make use of the checklist well. You can develop a checklist. Let's see how you can develop a checklist in the next exercise. Thank you so much.